Hiya! Welcome to this, my 24th episode of VideoFuzzy, titled Podcasts Like Me, Sherwood Transfer. I'm your host, Terry J. Aman, and in this episode, I highlight the pilot episode of HBO's Dead Like Me as edited for rebroadcast on SciFi. My classic and current collections include some fascinating scientific, science fictional, and speculative inquiry. In what I've been watching, I encounter some disturbing insight with the Versace finale, and in my new segment, Video Outreach, I'm able to apply this project in the real world. Welcome to the show.
He doesn't have that on video, does he? We'll find out together on VideoFuzzy.
Oh, and before I get into this, some of you will have encountered a new 30-second promo that gives a basic introduction to this project. It's available through Apple Podcasts and iTunes to anyone interested in helping me spread the word about this little semi-regular media commentary of mine, or if anyone just wants to know what the heck I think I'm doing here. Either way, thanks, and all the best.
Friday Night Feature.
To put this in the mildest possible terms, Brian Fuller has an interesting mind. He's demonstrated this time and time again with his involvement in such epic science fiction as Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Voyager, and Heroes, and quirky speculative pieces like Wonderfalls, American Gods, and Pushing Daisies. His early 2000s entry, Dead Like Me, stands out to me as being a quintessential Brian Fuller production at the dancing intersection of death and whimsy. The opening sequence features a young woman's voice in a voiceover tracing the introduction of death into this world, a myth featuring a toad and a frog in a clay jar with death inside. Toad is charged by God with keeping the jar safe. Frog's carelessness breaks it and looses death upon God's creation, while God then gets to dodge the blame. Throughout all of this, there's an object rushing at the planet, just out of frame. The young woman is telling this fable about the vagaries of life and death and our existence, and as the camera pans past a beautiful blonde in a flowing gown atop a city spire, she intones, "That's not me, by the way." The beautiful blonde is Daisy Adair. The voice belongs to the perhaps somewhat less glamorous George Lass, played by Ellen Muth. George just turned 18. She is bereft of motivation because she can't make herself interested in any particular job, so her mom's about ready to kick her out of her house, or at least out of her bed, lays out a dressy white blouse and a black skirt for her, what George calls funeral clothes, and sends her on to the Happy Time Temp Agency, where she meets with Dolores Herbig, as in her big brown eyes. The interview goes not well, and Dolores banishes George to a basement full of endless filing. On her break, George finds out what that just-out-of-frame hurtling towards the planet object was from back with the frog and the toad fable. It's gotten much closer to her now, and as she turns, a toilet seat from a Chinese space station smashes into her, and she's dead. Any other series, that'd pretty much be the end of it. But in the world Brian Fuller has created here, the pilot episode of Dead Like Me, which turned up in my collection on disc 467, Mandy Patinkin as Grim Reaper Rube is in charge of a handful of Grim Reapets, and he has just recruited George to be one. Nope, she doesn't get a lot of say in it, and because of how reaping works, her quirky, violent death means that she's now mostly responsible for taking on quirky, violent reaps. That is, if a person is not reaped, their soul is trapped in their body and can't move on to the next thing. Different for everyone, usually pleasant in the universe of this show. More pleasant than probably it ought to be, honestly, given, people. They show up, touch the dead or about to be dead, thus, in the universe imagined by this show, freeing their souls from their bodies. As for whom they're touching and when, Rube lets them know. Rube gets together with them every day at the Waffle House. He gives them their assignments, and they spend the rest of the show following them up, all while pursuing their day jobs. The Reapers don't look the same as they did in life, so their family isn't traumatized by seeing them out walking around. Even so, George can't leave her family alone. Her little sister Reggie becomes obsessed with her and her memory, and for a while steals toilet seats and hangs them from a tree, so yeah, she's coping. George is prevented from talking to her family directly, however, because when she does, whatever she was trying to say to them, it's erased from her memory. So she quickly realizes if all she's got now is memories, if she's going to retain them at all, she needs to treasure them to herself. That's her family, though, not random former co-workers, and she goes back to work at the Happy Time Temp Agency, which generally gives her the freedom she needs to pursue her reaps. Dolores Herbig, fat ass, as George called her while she was still alive, is a bit of a pain in the rear, but she manages. I loved this inventive, inquisitive show, the curious creations and situations these characters explored, a conversation about life and death, actions and consequences, love and fear and redemption, and the nature of existence that a show like this could take in unexpected ways and from completely different perspectives. It was respectful of loss. Mandy Patinkin's character, Rube, was a father figure for George, who grieved herself, her own loss, the death experience, which is a perspective we do not encounter a lot outside of Our Town or the Spoon River Anthology, more Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Angel or Supernatural, I guess. I guess we've found ways to explore this loss where we've determined to. I guess I really appreciated this show because it found ways of doing so while also being entertaining, but all the while crafting a space where we could imagine continuation rather than senseless, meaningless loss. In reality, in our reality out here in consensus reality, communication is lost, information is lost. It breaks down, the mute grave a maw that awaits with ever-decreasing patience, so we make our peace, our goodbyes. Shows like this let us peek beyond, wave goodbye. While dark, it's comforting, and Brian Fuller used exactly the right tone of voice in presenting this world. I believe I was able to archive most of this show, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of it as it tracks into view. Oh, and while clicking around in IMDb for this piece, I wanted to take a moment to highlight Dolores, played by Christine Wills. I was surprised to discover she was the actress who played the DMV demon in Reaper, and also took on roles in Stephen King's Kingdom Hospital, The X-Files, Smallville, and Supernatural, that B-movie Sucker Punch that I discussed back in episode 19, as well as The Outer Limits and Cupid, among so many others over the years. She was even in another episode that I cataloged, spoiler alert, for my classic collection for this installment, appearing as Mrs. Foote in the Psych episode Spelling Bee. Well done, Mrs. Wills. She's been in so many productions in my personal media collection, I posted some screen caps on my VideoFuzzy page on Facebook. Crowdsourcing! Dead Like Me had a lot of work to do to be my Friday night feature this go-round. I encountered a lot of really spectacular finds while cataloging this set, which included an unfinalized disc 464, which I cataloged while transferring it to a clean disc. The disc featured a jaw-dropping episode from the 3rd season of Rescue Me, where a fake affair firefighter Tommy Gavin pursues to make his ex-wife Janet jealous, while Janet is anyway busy sleeping with his cop brother Johnny, this after Tommy had rough and potentially non-consensual sex with Janet in a previous episode. This fake affair with Johnny's ex, Rose, doesn't get back to Janet, however. It gets back to Sheila, his long-term paramour and cousin Jimmy's widow, who has a complete breakdown at the end of the episode. See, also on this disc were 3 clips from some unnamed and, at first, seemingly untraceable singing competition, crowdsourcing Exhibit D. I'll post some screen caps on VideoFuzzy's Facebook page. An enthusiastic audience was packed into a fantastically ornate theater. I could see it was a CBS production, and the weather graphic superimposed on the broadcast showed that there was some kind of storm going on the night they broadcast it. I recorded 3 clips of 3 singers belting out cover songs for a panel of judges, whose reviews of these performances I did not apparently record or keep or bother with, and naturally 12 years later I have no memory of this whatsoever. The clips did include the names of the singers, however. I had Toby Rand singing Somebody Told Me by The Killers, Jill Joya singing Bring Me to Life by Evanescence, and Chris Pearson singing If You Could Only See by Tonic. Of the 3, the most Google-friendly seemed like it was going to be Jill's, and sure enough, punching her name into the Gargulator returned something called Rockstar Supernova, which, according to IMDb, aired mostly during July and August of 2006. I don't know how far along in the competition these recordings were made, but according to that nearby episode of Rescue Me I mentioned, they did not air too far away from July 11th, 2006, which according to episode dates posted at imdb.com, places this at about the 3rd episode in the competition rounds, which is plenty good enough for me. Provenance tracked as far as I feel it needs to be for my purposes. Crowdsourcing Exhibit D rests.
Diving into the classic collection.
Also on that recovered disc 464, I found an episode from the 3rd season of Hustle on AMC called Ties That Bind Us, in which the talented team of grifters employ their sleight of mind in updating an old man bank swindle, promoting and propagating worthless shares of a non-existent enterprise to trick a holding company into buying them all up in anticipation of selling them off at an outrageous profit, the trick being for the old man to fake his own death and make off with the profits and all the confusion. The team knows the old man in this case, Richard Chamberlain as James Whittaker Wright III, is a longtime grifter himself and is probably trying to pull a fast one on them, and despite all of their precautions, they're right. They track him to his flight to South America where he waves goodbye from the tarmac. Fortunately, young Danny Blue has swindled the swindlers and secured profits from a tidy little side investment that paid off, so despite the main swindle quite literally heading south, the team comes out ahead. The fun with this one was the cast appearing in silent film era cutaways, illustrating the scam to the audience in black and white and period dress as the modern scam played out. A fun installment of a fun series and also well worth featuring. So many candidates. Also in the running were the Monk episode Mr. Monk and the Garbage Strike, where Mr. Monk is just plain out losing it with San Francisco's trash piling up and the city's lack of sanitation. He can't think straight, and at one point in his investigation accuses no less likely a suspect than Alice Cooper of murdering the city's sanitation union boss because he was jealous of his wingback chair. Apart from a concert poster, I think the only place Alice Cooper actually appeared was in Monk's reconstruction of this crime, but he was so friggin' hilarious, chewing up the scenery as this jealous, furniture-coveting ne'er-do-well. As you can probably tell by now, this was a truly epic run in my media collection. For instance, I encountered the pilot episode of my very favorite buddy crime-solving comedy Psych, as well as the second episode where I broke out Sean's meeting Juliet for the first time and impersonating her in the voice of an 8th grader. The pilot episode had a lot of work to do establishing Sean's psychic, or rather hyper-observant gifts, and his restive relationship with Corbin Burnson as his father and Timothy Odinson as Detective Carlton Lassiter. It was lightened beautifully, however, by his chemistry with Dule Hill as Burton Magic Head Guster, also known as Gus, and also known as Felicia Fancybottom, Ovaltine Jenkins, Galileo Humpkins, Squirts McIntosh. Oh, no. Some other time when this show is the actual Friday night feature and not just some random episode being Frankendisked, then will I raid the Psych Wiki Burton Guster names and Samantha Bee those things, but for this one, that's just something to look forward to. Okay, 2 more. Hummingbird Salamakia and Gurton Buster. Okay, 1 more. Chasbono. And Trapezius Milkington. Fortunately, in 8 seasons, there were like dozens of these, so once I get to them for realsies, there will be plenty. I also kept a computer graphic heavy installment of a Nova episode illustrating Brian Greene and his presentation of string theory in his book The Elegant Universe. It served as a decent illustration of what we knew about string theory as she was spoke in about October of 2003. And I'm not being condescending. Honestly, reading the thing, it was pretty clear he was doing everything he could to explain the concept of extra dimensions curled up inside themselves, the practical implications of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle at the quantum level, quantum foam, and quantum mechanics, and the nature of reality as we're able to perceive it to laypersons. If he'd not had to dumb it down for us mortals, I'm pretty sure the topic would have remained entirely opaque. In November of 2015, while demonstrating Einstein's theory of general relativity and the curvature of space-time as a guest of CBS Late Show host Stephen Colbert, celebrating the anniversary of the theory, Stephen had Brian Greene explain it with the directive, "Don't dumb it down for us at all." Stephen said, "People always ask guys like you to explain this to me like I'm a 5-year-old. He said, I want you to explain this to me like I'm a person who is my age, but with an advanced degree in physics and high mathematics. I just want to," he said, "lean into my ignorance of this." So Brian Greene said, "So Albert Einstein says that space-time is a 4-dimensional housed or differential manifold on which a metric tensor is imposed that solves the Einstein field equation, and that metric tensor gives rise to geodesics, and objects that are not experiencing any other force will move along the geodesic described by that metric." 300 years post Newton's narrowing in on it using 4 unique symbols describing proportional ratios of mass and inverse ratios of distance. That and 6 blackboards filled with equations made of symbols I don't know what they all stand for describes the path the Earth and everything else follows around a space-time warping sun and how they have done for billions of years, and we are still working out how. Hopping back to the Nova presentation, even with the somewhat too present computer graphics, there were allegories and illustrations Greene was able to present that worked to relate the information that made me feel like I'd been guided in the direction of some answers, while making it clear that there was quite a lot more to know.
Current collection.
And welcome to part 2 of my conversation on the topic of string theory. This exploration was continued somewhat, although much more obliquely, in my discovery on disc X123 of a PBS biopic of Stephen Hawking from 2013, which seems to have aired late last year. I enjoyed his book, A Brief History of Time, and it was cool to see that, isolated as he felt at times, Hawking was still able to get around and to present lectures to packed lecture halls well into his battle with Lou Gehrig's disease. His take on the development of high-energy physics into quantum physics and string theory up to and including the recent experimental proof for Einstein's theories regarding gravitational waves as presented in A Brief History of Time was wonderfully accessible, and Greene and Hawking together gave me, I feel, sufficient grounding to take on Dr. Lisa Randall's much more technical, subtle, nuanced, and involved take in Knocking on Heaven's Door, which I'm working through in the moment. Fascinating. Where I'm at in the work right now is she's walking me through the Large Hadron Collider. I'm barely able to keep up, but once again, it's good to feel I'm not being talked down to, although it's clear she's done a lot of work to keep this topic relatable. Of course, that's a little more along the lines of what I've been watching, or rather what I've been reading. And before I close out my current collection, I thought I'd mention a couple of other highlights, including David Bradley's wonderful turn as the first Doctor, Bill Hartnell, in the 2013 Doctor Who Making of Dramatization and Adventure in Space and Time, which grounded his reappearance alongside footage of his subject in the Doctor Who 2017 Christmas special, Twice Upon a Time, in which I'd promised myself I'd make up for my misstatement in episode 21, the World War I soldier, the Doctors, Hartnell, or Bradley rather, as number 1, and Capaldi as number 12, encountered in their shared space and time. That soldier was revealed to us late in the episode with the name Lethbridge Stewart. For longtime fans of the show, we know not hardly random at all. This was the set of discs with Nick Offerman as that bread-making guru on both Will and Grace, and also the Kennedy Center Mark Twain Awards for Humor presented to Jay Leno and Eddie Murphy. Also cropping up in this set were Patton Oswalt and Chris Maloney in the Sci-Fi presentation of Happy, which was some of the most outrageously graphic violence that I've encountered in a Christmas-themed production since probably Die Hard, or that South Park episode, or that other South Park episode. Apart from the violence, one truly subversive image I did not notice the first time I saw these was when the kids show impresario Sonny Shine was opening his stage show. He had some animated wishies on the screen behind him, and I guess I just missed this the first time around, but one of them shot a rainbow right out its butt. Delightful. Speaking of missing out the first time around, heading into the 3rd season of The Magicians, Sci-Fi re-aired the 2nd season episodes but not the 1st season ones, and would not make them available on demand. So I tracked through what was on demand and saved the season 1 episode summaries that were put together and featured the cast members. It was the lightest possible summary I could have consumed, and having done so, I don't really feel like I'm all that up to speed on the show, but until Sci-Fi decides to just let me in on it, I mean, fingers crossed they did re-air all of BSG before the final season, after all. This not especially informative overview will just have to do.
What I've been watching.
Wow, lots to talk about this time. I want to start out by extending my comments from episode 23 on the live NBC presentation of Jesus Christ Superstar. I thought they did a remarkable job. In a well-directed presentation like this, where it's not always clear who is playing what right away, I felt like I could anticipate the roles the players were taking on, and was pleasantly surprised when, as one instance, Simon the Zealot leapt to address Christ in the public square, and also which one of them was Peter. Of course, despite not being named right away, we know immediately which one is Judas, and Brandon Dixon sang him with passion and subtlety. The relationship with John Legend as an occasionally Jedi Christ was shaped beautifully, with good intuitive energy between the two. I mentioned I enjoyed the 1973 film version, so that's the standard I measure everything against, and while certainly darker, this production held its own clear shine. That is, while I reject this abstract temple scene, along with the ridiculous whipping scene before Pilate, that is, I saw what message they were working for, but in my opinion they missed it as completely as some of the dancers involved. It set the stage for Sarah Bareilles as Mary Magdalene to reprise her plaintive "I don't know how to love him," the sequins shimmering on the floor in the firelight. That would absolutely have still been possible if they'd staged the temple scene properly, in my opinion, but the scene flowed capably through the Heal Me Nightmare into Mary's song. And of course, having mentioned him in the monk callback up there, I needed to highlight Alice Cooper's brilliant turn as King Herod. Oh, wow, was that a get. I remembered that I'd also seen him in the Tim Burton production of Dark Shadows in 2013, so I collected some screen caps of his appearances in my media collection and posted them to my VideoFuzzy page on Facebook as well. Pilate himself was fantastic, Ben Daniels as Pontius Pilate, and I've got to say the sheer amount of leather involved in this stage presentation really worked. Congratulations to costuming. Updating the Tell Me Christ news media presentation with actual mics and cell phones really worked beautifully, and returning to staging for a moment, as the crucifixion progressed, I didn't see how the resurrection was going to work in this context. When it came down to it, though, the director handled it almost perfectly. In the stage presentation, Christ resurrects in the curtain call, cleaned up from the ordeals of his crucifixion, walking out to take a bow. That appearance completes the storytelling for a show like this. Judas's high-energy finale tracks to the last words, "It is finished," and in this production, Christ ascends into the heavens actually on the cross. But where it fell apart was, okay, everyone else, it's cool for them to break character and come to the curtain call in joyous celebration. That's the anticipation. But Caiaphas and Annas should not come bounding onto the stage in triumph. Yes, their characters think they've won, and yes, as actors they want to celebrate and bathe in the applause, but this would have worked a lot better for them to have maintained character, stride out right after Pilate and Herod in dismissive dignity and vanish to the sides as quickly as they could manage. I feel that especially Annas' fist-pumping celebration nearly wrecked John Legend's curtain call resurrection. Now, that barely touches a brilliant performance by everyone. A live stage production is a high-wire act. Everyone has to be so on point, and I felt that that added to the strength of this presentation. It was sadly missing one of my favorite songs, the conversation between Annas and Caiaphas, which I think better lays the groundwork for the meeting with the temple leadership. It's not a deal-breaker, and well done, everyone, but I think I'll probably be returning more often to the movie version all the same. Speaking of a production taking on way too much, were we? Maybe. The Alienists smashed the last quarter of the book just about into the final 42 minutes of production. It's a shame because as written there's a lot of really good story, high-powered investigation, and outstanding character development in Caleb Carr's novel that is simply unavailable in a project this size. You just could not explore this story properly. You did not have the time for the revelations to reveal in the time they'd need to for the story to unfold as it should. Cramming this all into a dozen episodes or so with any kind of production value, the killer simply needs to be larger than life, a little too psychic, a little too magical, and the team pursuing him just a little bit too vulnerable. The final showdown was nowhere near the scope or scale as the book had the time, patience, and subtlety to present, leaving everything a little too ham-fisted and presentational. If a guy could murder child after child after child as brutally as he did and get away with it for as long as he did, he needed to be better than this show could ultimately allow him to be. It's kind of like for the first 9 episodes they were doing everything they could to present the story mostly as the book outlined it, maybe just a bit expedited, and by the last episode it was like, you're out of episodes, wrap this up. That said, I enjoyed revisiting this story and these heroes in this show, but this denouement to conclusion you could get whiplash from. Better was the finale of American Crime Story, The Assassination of Gianni Versace. I'd earlier longed for some insight into Andrew Cunanan's motivations, troubled in episode 21 at this instinct, searching for some reason for wanting this insight. Well, the second to the last episode was very instructive. From a young age, Andrew Cunanan was not only assured by his controlling, driven, somewhat crazy, and definitely abusive father, Modesto Cunanan, not only assured that he was special, it was demonstrated to him. When the family moved into their new house, his father and mother and siblings slept piled into one bedroom, while Andrew was given the master suite on his own. His father bought him a car when he was 10, more and before his older siblings who were actually old enough to drive. His father would come home claiming he'd not gotten a job, though in actuality he had, and then punish his wife, his crazy, long-suffering wife, for believing him, for not believing in him, for not protesting, "No, you got it, I would know better than you." Modesto perpetrated all kinds of securities fraud, nipping out of the country and home to his native Manila just ahead of the SEC, leaving his family broke and unable to fend for themselves, and his son, Andrew, entirely unready to take charge of his own life. He'd raised a party boy who was better at lying and being idle than working, who lashed out at what he felt was unfair, committing multiple murders to keep his secrets secret, to keep anyone from confronting him with the truth. And this was sad, but it became troubling in the final scene. The cops had tracked him to a houseboat in South Beach, Miami, where he'd been pinned down since his murder of Gianni Versace, and just as he's about to take his own life and end this nightmare his life had become, he has a vision, or rather, executive producer and consummate storyteller Ryan Murphy provides him with a vision, since there would be no way to confirm this, that he had a vision of himself as a young boy, contemplating the person he'd become since he was that child, and as he is about to pull the trigger, the scene shifts to the conversation he'd had with Versace at the opera in San Francisco. "I'm so happy right now," Andrew said. "What if you'd had a dream your whole life that you were someone special, just no one believes you? Not really. They smile at you and say, sure, sure. And then what if the first person that truly believes you was the most incredible person you'd ever met?" "But it's not about persuading people that you're going to do something great," Versace responds. "It's about doing it. You have to finish your novel. Or something else," Andrew rushes. "Do you think I could be a designer? I know literally everything there is to know about fashion. Maybe I could assist you, or be your protege." "I'm not looking for an assistant," Versace demurs. "But being here like this, with you, it feels like destiny. Why can't you feel it?" Andrew has spent his whole life being told he was special, without having to demonstrate it, without special ever having to mean anything. I think I saw something in that, saw something in me, where teachers, where grades and homework growing up, I was always able to excel at that kind of stuff. You're told you're really smart, and then you graduate, and the world is way more pass-fail than pass-fail means making rent or not, or making enough to cover bills and food, and some months that doesn't always happen. You feel a real disconnect from excelling in one sector of life, but learning too directly how meaningless that sector is. That intelligence in and of itself is not a survival skill, and you feel a little bit lied to. Now, I think this would be a good place to step away from empathizing with the serial killer. This is not and would never be the solution for fleeting existential crises, but damn if Murph did not manage to humanize this sad, strange, lost, and beautiful boy. Towering performances. Judith Light, as the widow of one of Cunanan's victims, brought such controlled, brilliant anger and magic to her finale performance. That too was perfect. She kept us focused on who were the wronged here, who had truly lost. Yes, empathy, naturally. Andrew was absolutely in pain, but people grow up and take responsibility for themselves all the time. While putting Versace in the title was misleading, Murph told this story very well, more or less drawing the right parallels between Versace and Cunanan and ending on just the right note. Now, I've got to talk about the FX production of Legion. I have to. There's just Okay, really super fast. The Magicians closed out Season 3 pretty well. I felt like post the quest, the 7 keys to magic, the revelation, and then the release of the monster was both too direct and too off-camera, and the team having brought magic back into the world in the exact same moment, forgetting everything about themselves and their history and their own involvement with it, was way too corny. That said, the story left everything in a really good place for Season 4. And Kathy Griffin's impression of Kellyanne Conway on Comedy Central's The President's Show Season 2 premiere was simply epic. She presented her so perfectly tone-deaf and spinny. I don't know how they missed bringing her on before, but now that they have, that was pure joy. Now, as for Legion, seriously...
Installation for my ability to Even has failed. Even is unavailable in your area. For Even, you may wish to check with your service provider. The Season 2 premiere featured, along with a brilliant reimagination of what happens to life when Dan Stevens as David, the telekinetic, formerly crazy person, is in a coma for a year, the world-building tracking through research, strategy, defense. It drops we the viewers in just as unfamiliar a world as we encountered in the Season 1 premiere. They're reintroducing us to characters the show itself needs to reintroduce both to David and to each other. World killer Farouk is trapped in what seems to be a reality-manipulating manifestation of some sort, capable of releasing him into the world as Lenny and Oliver, because they do attack the compound while David, Sid, and them are distracted, killing the sentries to an upbeat song and dance number. Jean Smart as Melanie seems to be high on blue, and why not? They're taking orders from a literal basket case, communicating through mustachioed, shapely androidettes called Vermilion.
None of this would, in itself, affect my ability to Even. Rather, I need to highlight a 5-minute portion of the season premiere in which Bill Irwin as Carrie Loudermilk boosts David's kinetic reach with an isolation tank, and David is able to reach out to Lenny and Oliver surrounded by the infected, persons paralyzed and locked in their own mind, except for their disturbing, endlessly chattering teeth. The infected are all kinds of packed into a dance hall type situation, so why not? David communicates with Lenny and Oliver in the most direct way he can, wordlessly, through powerful, supremely talented interpretive dance. Why not? David syncs up with a quadrille of infected, to which Oliver responds in an awesomely powerful dance, and then Lenny presents her own quite outrageously sensuous dance, while the target of all three of their investigations, Farouk's body, the monk, hides unseen among the infected. The dance even affects Carrie in the lab, and I have to say, watching it, that was compelling. I've got to even wonder, when these people were cast, did the director even know that they would need to be powerfully talented dancers? Aubrey Plaza as Lenny has had to be sensuously physical before, but I couldn't get my head around how incredible that passage was. No words, but said everything it ever would need to. This season is off to a fantastic start.
Video out.
Oh yes, this project has provided a couple of real-world benefits to me already, but it was nice this past week or so to extend that benefit a little further. A couple of weeks ago, a theater friend of mine in Minot, Nancy Pearson, posted on Facebook that she had 6 VHS tapes from when she was a speech coach in Sherwood, North Dakota. Sherwood peeps, anyone want these? She posted, I have a list of the contents of the speech ones if you want more info. The tapes were labeled Sherwood High School Reunion, Talent Show, Parade, 1989, State Speech, 1988, State Night, 1994, State Night Music and Speech, 1992, State Speech and Music, 1990 and 91, and Junior High Night, May 21st, 1991. Instantly, people posted wanting digital copies, and my own reply to her post was, yeah, you should absolutely transfer them. VHS gold. I then sent her a private message that this was a thing that I did, and depending on how many there were, she said she just had the 6, I would totally transfer them for her. She hopped them into Monday's mail, and as of April 3rd, when I got home from work, I had a project waiting for me in my dining room. I took them upstairs and popped the tape labeled the Sherwood High School Reunion in with a blank disc, and in moments was greeted with the wobbly, amber-tinged image of a capacity crowd and the azure curtains of the Sherwood Auditorium and the Sattler brothers singing about taking a ride down memory lane. Yep, it seemed like we were off to a good start.
In 1989, North Dakota was celebrating its centennial, and the gathering of that reunion marked that occasion. Pioneer descendants were recognized, there were songs sung in close harmony, dancing through several eras, and some comedy routines that held up pretty well, some better than others, of course. The night closed with some high-energy and talented swing dancing, which was quite impressive. A moment later, the tape shifted to an outdoor scene, and Sherwood parade entries rolled on by. Whoever shot this one decided we only needed a few seconds with each entry. I didn't notice, but it's possible they were already running out of tape. Each of the tapes was recorded at super long play, and except for one speech entry that went just a few minutes over and ended up straddling 2 discs, they all fit on one disc, recorded at high quality. Well, as high quality as home video allows. In that era, if your camera gave you a discernible picture with any focus at all, and whatever sound would play back through your television, you were doing pretty well. HD, surround sound, and widescreen ratio were simply unavailable. I mentioned the speech units. Over the course of the next couple of days, I transferred the tapes, monitoring the transfers as closely as I was able. It helped that I was still editing episode 23 of this podcast for a good chunk of the time, so my VHS DVD Debersonia was otherwise free for the transfer. I was able to watch the junior high night while that was going on, which featured plays and skits, including the classic Who's On First. The state music and speech nights were pretty cool to watch too, though some were easier to hear than others. I did let a few of them transfer while I was gone at work, and by Saturday I had 6 tapes transferred to 7 discs. That 4-minute speech that cut out halfway through and included in its entirety by itself on a second supplemental disc. As it happened, I had some business to take care of in Minot, so last Sunday Ralph and I made the 100-mile trek north. The weather was crappy, but largely without incident, though it was impossible to miss the 4x4 that ended up on its side just south of Minot, a reminder that whatever the calendar said, winter was not done with this part of the world, and met up with Nancy to return the original tapes along with the discs I'd burned. I asked her about the tapes, where she'd come across them, and how they'd surfaced.
My house, yeah. I mean, here. I wondered if anybody wanted them, because I'm in this mode of someday we'll have to leave our house and our kids are going to have to clean up everything we've left. Could I clean it up before that time? Yeah. So this was all Sherwood memorabilia.
She said that she'd had all these performances preserved, but no way of doing anything with them, or even seeing them.
So that's why I put it on Facebook if somebody wanted it, because I couldn't do the copying of it. So that's where I was started out with that. Well, because I couldn't watch them and see what was even on them, before I sent them to you.
You didn't have a VHS player, or...
I haven't had for years. So that's the other reason, see. They've been sitting here for years, and I can't do anything with them. When I had, state nights, these would have been kids that had gone through regionals and were going on to the state competition when I was coaching the speech team. So we'd have somebody in the audience, doing the video for us. And then sometimes the kids got copies of them, or their moms were there doing it and whatever, too. But, yeah, and then moving here, now it's all DVD and computer and podcasts, and I can't keep up with it. Yeah, I was the speech coach, so it's my students that were performing, except for the one is a talent show, and that was in '89. And one of the kids that's a friend of mine on Facebook, his mom is singing on that, so he really wants to get a copy of that, too. I'll be able to watch these, and like I said, the talent show, and I know a guy that can probably make a copy of this for me, because Brian wants one, and Ryan wants one, and I think Sarah wants one of these, so I can take care of that. I can take care of that. This is amazing. It's meaningful to me now because I taught these kids, and I coach these kids. My sons weren't involved in this. It's not meaningful to them at all. So I do want to be able to pass it on to people that it will be meaningful. But, Sherwood's closed, now, and gone to Mohall, and all of our trophies that we won as Sherwood, I don't even know what happened to them. So, I don't know where the interest is
That's true. It's kind of it's just like a little bit of history, but it doesn't have a place.
A small segment would be interested in it, So we'll share it with those that are great memories of the students that were talented performers. Just such great memories of.
Well, now you'll be able to enjoy them because you'll have something that'll actually play it.
And I can pass them on to those that would be, very, very much interested and involved in it. So thank you.
And so,
I appreciated it so much.
Well, absolutely. I can only imagine how many of these memories are locked away on basement shelves and dusty boxes, less and less accessible as the world's number of operational VCR dubbers and even just plain VCRs steadily decline. They have not been standard home theater repair equipment for over a decade. No one's making them anymore. The ones that exist will continue to break down, and despite the ranks of TV VCR repairmen that the International Correspondence School purported to train in ads running constantly throughout the entire 1990s, I'm pretty sure probably nobody knows really how to repair them. Soon enough, anything not digitized will likely be locked up worse than a mosquito in amber. That said, boutique artisanal pop-ups might manage transfers well into the future. After all, vinyl made a comeback. 8-tracks to date have not, however, so place those bets. And with that, thank you for checking in on my video cataloging project. Thanks also to former Sherwood speech coach and trainer Nancy Pearson of Minot for inviting me into her home and agreeing to be part of this. Thank you so much. You can check out my catalog listing along with audio links at VideoFuzzy.blogspot.com and past episodes of this podcast at Apple Podcasts and iTunes at VideoFuzzy.libsyn.com. Feedback is always appreciated, and you can contact me through my blog or podcast sites or through my VideoFuzzy page on Facebook. For VideoFuzzy, I'm Terry J. Aman. Happy viewing.
It might be amazing, it might just be scuzzy. We'll find out together on VideoFuzzy.